Hello and welcome to episode 22 of the Wilder podcast. This week we interview Elliot and Digby from the Citizen Zoo, who have been leading the way with species introduction across London. We talk about the impacts of beavers in Ealing, the concepts of nature-friendly cities, and the opportunities and threats associated with urban rewilding. Chloe, hello.
Hello.
Wow, what a difference an episode makes when it comes to the weather, at least.
It's pretty much all I've been talking about with everyone this week is the fact the sun has finally arrived.
And it is the power of the sun, the power of the change. But I suppose the slight reflection on that is that you've got to have the negatives to have the positive to appreciate the positives.
Absolutely. I always think that's the benefit of living in our temperate climate, is that when the seasons come, you really appreciate the shift in them.
So maybe people listening who are new to the podcast, and so it may be worth starting with a quick update. I'm Tom and this is Chloe.
Hi.
We are husband and wife. We are very fortunate to be rewilding or wilding our 80-acre farm here in Monmouthshire. And a year ago, we knew nothing about pretty much anything when it came to ecology or nature restoration, etc. We just knew it was important and we should try and do it.
And thanks to some amazing guests over the last 9 months, probably, we have now know a little bit more than nothing.
Yes, we now know what we don't know, which I think is a huge step forward. And so the format of this podcast is really to document our journey. We give a very, very brief update at the start, and then we go into the main effort, which is the chat with our guests each week, and we learn and take snippets away from it. So welcome on the journey. Oh, we'll start with the update then, Chloe. So what's happened in the last few weeks?
I'm conscious we haven't given much of an update on our tree situation. So for those listeners that might be aware, we had a community day back in March, where as part of the day we planted 350 trees. We did a bit of an experiment. So the most environmentally friendly method to plant trees is without any tree protection at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so we thought, well, let's give that a crack. Alongside some other approaches, we had some tree guards that were about 60 centimetres and some tree guards are about 1.2 metres. And the difference between the two is the smaller ones are supposed to protect against voles and rabbits and the bigger ones against the deer. And we thought we'd just do an experiment across the site and see how they all did with those different levels of protection.
Yeah, and we also had biodegradable tree guards and versus plastic tree guards and different types of biodegradable tree guards. I mean, for people that probably haven't thought about this as much as we have, that might sound like a really boring process, but it's an important experiment and experts can tell you how to do things, but until you try it yourself, you really don't learn. So the long and the short of this is that we have now learned that we have, a swarm of deer.
We have a healthy population of deer.
And anything that hasn't been protected by a tree guard has now been nibbled. And that's a significant number and probably not surprising, but what has surprised me is the speed at which they have had a nice buffet.
And it is a nice thing because there are a few on the fringes of the project or perhaps in not part of the deer highway that are trying their best still without the protection. But yeah, on the whole, sadly, quite a lot of the ones that were naked are no longer with us.
So the long and short of it is that for where we live, because of our healthy population of deer, we really do need to use the larger tree guards, the 1.2 metre high ones. And that will protect them because those 6 centimetre ones are going to be great until they get above 6 centimetre and then it's just going to be a head height buffet for the deer as well.
Yeah.
Right, should we move on to sticking with the tree theme and another update?
Well, I wonder if you're best placed to tell the story, Tom, given you made the discovery.
Okay, a few days back now, we were walking around the boundary of the land and unfortunately we stepped into one of our fields and there was a humongous oak tree on its side, completely out of the blue, did not expect it. It's not like we've had storms or anything. So unfortunately, it is about, 250 years old, a very, very beautiful tree, and it's just come down for a combination of challenges and issues, which probably won't go into now. So that's negative, and that's of course sad, but the positive reframe is that deadwood, and this is going to be the mother of all deadwood, has a huge role to play, and we are not going to touch it, we're not going to move it, we're not going to chop it up, we're going to leave it and let nature do its thing. So it's a nice step in the process of defielding, because we now have this tree that's lent into the field, so it's now providing that habitat and protection for mammals and all the other invertebrate, etc. that use it. So really sad that it's happened. There is a positive and a silver lining, and we'll be able to now come and visit the land and see the oak on its side.
And it's going to be really interesting to see that process over the next few years. Like, what does that actually mean to have this deadwood on the land, and how long does it take to, decompose? Is that the right word? There's probably a better word.
Break down. But what I do know is we're not going to be around to see it. It is that big. I think we probably won't even notice it breaking down much by the time we are shuffled off this mortal coil. So the final bittersweet, I suppose, element of this is that the next day you and I wandered up there. And as we got closer to it, we're probably chatting too loud or having a passionate discussion. And these two large, healthy-looking barn owls flew out of this tree, which was a bit of a surprise in the middle of the day, I've got to say. Wonderful to know that we've got a mating pair of barn owls nearby. And then a little bit sad that their home, of course, has now fallen over on its side. And if you poke your head in the hole where it was, the nest has kind of fallen through 90 degrees. We didn't see any eggs, but you've got to assume they were at some, or at least going to be some in the short term. So sad. And we've gone back there. We've put a camera trap up. We haven't seen any activity there since then, but we do know there are plenty of other trees. We are very, very lucky with our number of oak trees and veteran oak trees around. So there will be a home for them nearby.
And hopefully as the grass gets longer over the summer period, we are looking forward to seeing an increase in our vole and shrew and small mammal population that will hopefully be the food that's needed for the barn owls over the summer.
So the final update from us, from our side, is that Project Pick is accelerating at a rate of knots.
Slightly terrifying me.
In just a few days' time, it's Friday evening that we're recording now because we're that cool. And the pigs, and on Monday, the pigs will be turning up. Now, luckily, the shelter's arrived, but that is pretty much as far as our preparations have gone. So
okay, we've done the pig admin. I got a CPH number and a herd number. I got some advice from the animal health people about how to look after pigs today. Right?
We've got our listener, Paul's going to come and coach us through
Paul's
this process.
Help us, yeah.
Don't worry about it. Paul, no pressure. So we're really looking forward to that. We're not going to talk about it in detail now because we will update listeners on the next episode, but something to look forward to. Would you like to introduce our guests for the interview?
I would love to. In this interview, we speak with Elliot, who is one of the co-founders of Citizen Zoo, and Digby, one of their urban rewilding officers. If you're living in the city and you're concerned about the ecological crisis or biodiversity loss, then this is a great interview to inspire you to think about what action you could take. Good morning, Elliot and Digby, and welcome to the Wilder podcast.
Oh, good morning, guys, and thank you so much for having us on.
Morning, Chloe. Tom, thanks for having us. Yeah, it's great to be here.
I was just having a quick look at your website to remind myself, and the tagline itself, Rewilding Our Future, I think it's fantastic. We're really excited to kind of get stuck into a conversation about urban rewilding and community engagement, and these are topics that are really close to us.
Oh, we're incredibly excited to get stuck in as well.
Introduced with the podcast, I'm wondering if you could both introduce yourselves and perhaps say a little bit about how you find yourself doing what you're doing.
Yes, my name is Digby Wheeler. I'm the Urban Rewilding Officer at Citizen Zoo. So I've been with the company now for just under a year. It's been a really exciting intro to my rewilding journey. It's my first rewilding official job, but it's something I've been following for a while. And it's just a really fascinating movement to be part of within this world that's incredibly hopeful and optimistic. In my role officially, I support a variety of projects that we run in London and further afield, doing urban rewilding critically. And yeah, there's a whole stream of different responsibilities involved with that. And it's been an amazing learning curve so far, and looking forward to talking about that today.
Yeah, and thanks, Digby. Yeah, so I'm Elliot. I'm one of the co-founders of Citizen Zoo, and yeah, I've got a real passion for rewilding and nature conservation, but integrating communities at the heart of all our projects. That's something you'll hopefully see today, that everything we do puts communities at the focus, at the heart of all of our conservation programs.
Wonderful. And community is a word that comes up a lot on this podcast. So yeah, we're delighted that we're going to be thinking about that theme as well today. So do you want to just introduce us to Citizen Zoo and how it came about?
Yeah, so Citizen Zoo, we're a relatively new rewilding organisation. We actually started it, myself and Lucas, who's the other co-founder. We came out of our Masters in Conservation Science back in 2014 now, so quite a while ago. And we came out of that period, and that was a period where rewilding was getting more traction in the UK. And it took us a few years to really sort of think about it, but we really came about in 2019 when we launched something called it was in Cambridge University. It was a big rewilding symposium. There were people from around the world to come together to talk about rewilding, and it was a really fantastic event, and that really helped to sort of showcase Citizen Zoo as well as sort of a new organisation. So that's what we sort of got going. But yeah, we've been going for a good few years now, and we're growing all the time, which is fantastic. As Digby mentioned earlier, we have a whole range of projects, but most of them focus on the urban realm, because that's, as we will talk about, is where most people live, and we want to get these people involved in conservation on a daily basis, really, as they're walking around living their lives.
And because I'm curious, why Citizen Zoo?
Oh, in terms of the name, well, I think many organisations have names that actually don't really correspond to what they do, and we've wanted a name that sort of sounds a bit sort of that sticks in the mind a little bit, because Citizen Zoo, people think that's a bit of a strange word. Well, why is that? But I suppose at its core, citizen, we believe everybody has the ability to be a conservationist. Citizen is quite an interesting word, like contributing to society, and that's sort of falling that sort of area. And then zoo, just a sort of zoological element of it, but also a lot of our programs focus on species reintroductions and actually encouraging people to help with husbandry elements. So actually, some of our programs actually do have some element of animal husbandry, such as our grasshopper program. So yeah, that's sort of where it comes from. But people seem to, when you hear the word Citizen Zoo, just sort of stick in the mind a little bit. So that's why we've stuck with it.
Got to agree. It is a kind of phrase that I will remember. And I also, for some reason, it seems to fit. When Chloe said, you guys were coming on, I was like, all right, cool. I didn't think it was out of the ordinary. So it's nice to hear the background to it. So Elliot, my last question on the founding of the company. So you came out of your master's and you could have, I assume, gone into a number of jobs in the industry. So why did you specifically go into ecopreneurship, I would personally call it, and go and do something on your own? What was the inspiration? What do you hope to achieve with Citizen Zoo?
Well, first, I love the term ecopreneurship. I'd never come across that before. It's a really, really great term. That's a really good question. Came out of our masters, and we really thought there was actually a gap in terms of really integrating communities in the urban realm with rewilding. So I suppose we wanted to sort of help contribute to that gap. So it wasn't really being filled by potentially some other organisations, especially like applying rewilding principles to urban environments. So that's partly why we did it. But I suppose one thing to say is we were very excited about a new organisation that we can just really sort of say this is the direction of travel we want to take, and really be hopeful, and not sort of bureaucracy that maybe some other organisations might get stuck with, and really just to get moving. Because I think one thing we've got a record for is actually delivering stuff on the ground. When we say we're going to do something, we typically do it. Having that power to really say, we think this is a great idea, we want to go for it. And obviously working collaboratively, like all our projects are, it gives us slightly more power to sort of say, this is a great idea, we want to pursue it. And having our own sort of organisation to do that makes that slightly easier.
And last businessy question from my side, but what's your structure? Are you a charity, not for profit? And also, how big's the organisation now?
Sure, we're not a charity. We sort of did that on purpose. So we are a community interest company, a CIC or a KIC. It's not for profit. We are still, for community, and we don't make a profit. So everything we invest goes into conservation. But part of the reason was that I think, conservation is an amazing sector, but so much of conservation is based on grants, and a lot of our projects are based on grants. I think, typically a grant comes in for a project, that grant starts, that grant finishes, and then there's a very clear period where that project is running, and then there's not much of a legacy following it because it's purely dependent on the grant that's come in. So we wanted to try and create an organisation that has a sustainable operating model that can really, when we say we're going to do a project, we have sustainable funding to go into that, to fund it into perpetuity. So it doesn't come up to the end. When the grant comes to an end, the project doesn't end there as well. That's partly why we chose the CIC model, so we could try and integrate sort of business narratives into it to really try and have that really sort of sustainable business model, so we're not purely dependent on grants, which can be an issue for some projects.
I've got to say, that's music to my ears. Regular listeners to the podcast will know that is exactly what we're aspiring to achieve at the Grange project as well. Because the idea of that hand-to-mouth grant process, which again is important and does an important role, don't get me wrong, but it just doesn't seem logical to me. You've got to have a follow-on plan, and it can't just be feast and famine. So it's nice to hear that you guys are implementing that as well, and I'll probably interrogate you offline about other ways in which you're making that work. Let's address, I think, the elephant in the room of this conversation first, and then we can go into really the good work that you guys are doing and how you're doing the engagement. You've chosen the rewilding word, which for some people can be very contentious. We've had previously a guest on the podcast who would argue that the only way the word rewilding should be used is when you've got thousands of acres and you've got wolves going over the plains and all that kind of stuff. So I'd like to understand your perspective as to why you've chosen that urban rewilding concept and what that actually means to you.
Rewilding, as you say, is a really sort of interesting term, doesn't it? It means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And it can be, in many ways, a quite controversial term. But we've decided not to shy away from the word rewilding. We love the word rewilding in terms of the hope it brings. But also, on the one thing I really want to sort of push is, we're living in an ecological crisis at the moment. The UK is 189th on the planet when it comes to our ecological intactness. So we're really struggling when it comes to building back nature. And one thing I don't want to get too caught up in is just talking about definitions and getting too caught up on definitions, when the real thing is what we should be doing is proactive conservation. And one thing that we find in the urban environment, and let's just say 84% of the people in the UK live in the urban environment. These are the people we want to really engage with and get them excited about nature. What we've found from our personal experience is the word rewilding really does resonate. It resonates with businesses, it resonates with politicians, it resonates with local people. It's a word that people get excited about. If I said we're doing some ecological restoration, I'll probably get some blank faces. But I say we're going to rewild you, we're going to rewild this landscape, we're going to rewild this city.
Yeah.
It really gets people excited.
Yeah.
So that's something we've really tried to not shy away from. And we've actually got positive responses from it. And now we are seeing political traction. For example, Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, he set up the London Rewilding Task Force, which we were very proud to be sitting on. And so we're thinking it really is gaining traction.
That really resonates for me, your description about almost rewilding starting with people. We've got to engage people in the process, and then with that engagement becomes the action that's necessary. And I love your description of the need to get out on the ground and start doing. And if we spend too much time talking and debating terms and concepts, actually, is that a barrier to us doing the action that's needed? Thinking on the theme of action, what does it look like at Citizen Zoo? What is the urban rewilding that you're taking part in?
Lots of projects going on, and most of them are targeted on urban spaces. Many of our projects are looking at trying to sort of rebuild ecosystems where possible. So recognizing, these incredible complex ecosystems, we've been plucking out the functional pieces of the species, and these things are becoming less and less functional and more fragile as they become more and more denuded and impoverished. So a lot of what we're trying to do is that we're looking at how we can rebuild habitats, rebuild ecosystems, putting in functional species, but using people as the driving force to make that possible. One of the projects that we first started in London was working on the charismatic water vole, which is an amazing species that I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with, at least probably by name rather than by sight, because they are the unfortunate title of the UK's fastest declining mammal, which is a pretty devastating title, really. In my lifetime, which is just over 30 years, we've lost 97% of our water voles, which is absolutely horrific. And on my local river to where I live, called the Hogsmill, which is this beautiful chalk stream, water voles went extinct there in 2017. So a real shame. So what we did, we launched a project called Get Involved. Just trying to sort of integrate the people part of it there. We launched it in 2019, and over the course of the last sort of 5 years or so, we trained people to see the eyes through the world of a water vole. So we trained 60 people to get out onto the river and conduct habitat surveys, suitability surveys for this amazing species. What we recognised, actually, the habitat was in places suitable for water voles. And that was a good thing that we identified. And then we thought, okay, what's the other barriers to water voles? And the main thing that I imagine many of your listeners are aware of is the American mink. So the American mink, an invasive species that absolutely can devastate ecosystems, not only water vole populations, but ground nesting birds as well. So then we established a mink monitoring network across the river, again, led by this amazing team of volunteers. And over the course of 3 years or so, we found out that we had habitat. We also did some habitat restoration. We were on top of the mink situation. We recognised there weren't any mink. So then we actually got in touch with a prominent rewilder who's made his name very much in water vole conservation, Derek Gow. We ordered some water voles off him, which was great. Which meant in 2022, we released over 101 water voles back to this river. And that was purely, the driving force for this was communities. Just, they would not have been possible without their support. And we're really pleased to say the water voles are now doing very well on the river. We've got people monitoring the water voles every week, going out, getting involved in the project. But it's just one sort of small example of how this is a local species extinction that happened on a local river in London. But it was the local people that came together. By working together, we now reversed that trend. And now we're working. We've actually got a meeting coming up this week with the London Water Vole Working Group, which is being led by the Zoological Society of London. Now we're saying, how can we try and bring back water voles on all of the appropriate river catchments across London, and probably using what we've done here as an example, just using people as that driving force to make that happen.
A great example and very exciting. I'm just actually on your website now and I'm looking at the stats. I'm sure they're lagging behind on the website as they often do. But having an organisation where you can say, we have introduced over 5,500 wild animals to the country, I think is really exciting. You've got over 1,000 volunteers, which again, I want to hear about how you've attracted them and reached out to them, got them, increased the awareness of what you do, which I think would be fascinating to explore. You've also got 10,000 beneficial households as a stat there. Could you just expand upon what that actually means?
Yeah, I suppose we really need to go back on our website, update those figures a little bit. But what we mean by the meaning of that is recognising the people that are living in these environments. A big part of rewilding our city is not just about, restoring nature. Obviously, that's a big part of it, but it's about future-proofing our city to the challenges of climate change. So, for example, in London, we expect London by 2050 to have a climate of like Barcelona, something along those sort of lines. And one thing everybody now accepts is having a more biodiverse city, a more wild city, where you can benefit from the ecosystem services that these healthy ecosystems provide. The last 18 months was the wettest 18 months on record. We're regularly having, last year was the hottest year on record. And our people are going to people are going to struggle in our urban settings, because in our urban settings, flooding is a big risk. Drought can be a risk. Huge heating effects. We call them urban island heating effects, where the glass and concrete increases temperatures astronomically in the urban setting. What we mean by that is we want to we demonstrate the ecological ecosystem services that these species bring. And one big part of that is our beaver project. Beavers, ecosystem engineers, and they can really help benefit resilience to climate change, which is one of our sort of flagship projects, which we'd love to tell you more about as well.
That is the first thing that struck me when I went onto the website, and there was this massive, beautiful picture of a beaver and a big tagline saying, "We brought beavers back to London." And I think, wow, what a thing to be involved in. On that note, I bet it's really complicated and really hard. And actually, here's a stupid question that from someone who isn't actually educated in ecology. Are there even suitable areas for beavers to go back to obviously a very urbanized city? Like, how do they survive? How do they fit in?
Oh, yeah. Again, a really good question, Tom. I think so. Beavers are not the wilderness species that many people think. Across Europe, for example, in places like Munich, in places like Berlin, across North America and places like Vancouver, we have beavers living in the heart of these urban settings. So beavers, there's lots of beavers living in urban environments. So they don't depend on wilderness. They're actually a really adaptable creature. So what we did, working with the Beaver Trust, we set up something called the London Beaver Working Group about 4 years ago now. And this was trying to bring people together to sort of learn from our European and American colleagues, how can we try and make London a better place for beavers? And of course, a big part of that is habitat. Do they have the habitat that they can survive in? There's an amazing team at Exeter University who do lots of habitat modelling, looking at suitability modelling for beavers. And we're working with the Beaver Trust. We identified 10 sites across the whole of London. We were looking at these sites, we're saying, are these potential sites where we could reintroduce beavers? And a site that we came across was an amazing site called Paradise Fields in Ealing in Greenford.
That's a great name.
Yeah, exactly. But we didn't name it. We came with a name. Yeah, it sounds a bit cheesy, but it actually is called Paradise Fields. So these are beavers living in paradise.
Amazing.
To get there. So we conducted some habitat feasibility there, but it wasn't just the habitat that was so suitable. This beaver project is a really collaborative project. We work with the Ealing Wildlife Group, an amazing group of local volunteers who do fantastic stuff, to monitoring peregrines, to releasing harvest mice. You might have seen it in the news yesterday, and doing lots of amazing things like that. And there was an amazing appetite there for beavers, working with their founder, Sean McCormack, and also Ealing Council and the Friends of Horsenden. So it wasn't just we found this amazing site, there was great habitat, it always had an amazing community that said yes. A lot of people, you go up to someone and say, "Oh, we're thinking about bringing beavers here," and they look at you as if you're some sort of crazy raving person. But actually, they were thought, no, this is a great idea, let's do it. That firmly put us on our journey to bringing beavers back to London, and something that Digby has been heavily involved with.
It's been a wild and really joyful journey to start with this incredible project, the Ealing Beaver Project. Quite surreal sometimes, really. We had an amazing day on the 23rd of October last year where all these journalists turned up, all the volunteer community, the Mayor of London, and these amazing beaver family had been transported down from Scotland with Dr. Roisin Campbell-Palmer, who's the lead at the Beaver Trust. The atmosphere was incredible, one of the most electric mornings of my life, as we just waited for these 5 beavers to be released into the lagoon at Paradise Fields. For me, what's been amazing about this whole process, and I think it's our selling point as an organisation as well, is the community empowerment. There was already a large standing community with the Ealing Wildlife Group in that area, but we brought in a lot of new people, I think, just for the excitement that's followed these beavers coming into that site. To give you some background on the site as well, it's a 10-hectare, very urban basin, essentially, in urban Greenford, which is part of North Ealing. And it's a very urban site. It's next to a commercial retail park, and that in itself is a really wonderful opportunity. It's like next to a lot of schools. It's next to the Greenford tube station. So we kind of envisaged people using this space. It's a fully open urban beaver enclosure. We envisaged people using the space and accessing that beaver landscape on their way to school or when they're doing their shopping, not having to get on some method of transport. There's often, these rewilding sites are very far between in remote areas, and that is beautiful and amazing, but not everyone can access that easily. And one of the most exciting things for me is that people can do this without having to try too hard, which is so important for that engagement factor and also for exposing people to this amazing landscape that has been absent from the UK, or parts of the UK at least, for 400 years or more. Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, said we're bringing nature to the people here. And I thought that was really important. But in terms of also that empowerment and that skilling up and engaging people from the community, we have a really active community at Paradise Fields. We've got about 5 different WhatsApp groups that go off at all hours of the day and night. Camera trappers, fence checkers, people that are stewarding the public and helping to answer people's questions. So it's kind of almost a self-sustaining thing because there are so many committed members of that community. We've got 1.2 kilometres of fencing that goes around Paradise Fields, and it's the kind of top spec beaver-proof fence that was provided by the same contractors that did Wild Ken Hill, which is might know from Springwatch, which is in Norfolk. So we've got great beaver fencing, but there is always the chance that potentially a fox or a dog could dig under that fence, and that we don't want those beavers escaping right now. That's a future ambition, maybe, that we have free living beavers in the UK, but currently under the Natural England requirements, you can't have beavers outside of an enclosure. So these fence checkers are amazing because every single day, a pair of people from that community are walking around and doing a perimeter of the fence, checking for any breaches. And that's had a really interesting effect on rates of antisocial behaviour on site as well. Before the beavers came in, people were afraid to use the underpass, for example. There were instances of antisocial behaviour on site. But now, in a small way, but quite a profound way, I think the presence of people there all the time, of families visiting to see the beavers. We've got a lovely beaver mural made by a local artist called Shauna. I think that has also had a massive effect on the site, and people are starting to love it, starting to know about it. I think that, paired with the community engagement that we're doing with schools in Ealing, is really having a big impact, because, I mean, Elliot was just at an assembly yesterday, but we're hoping, and we're pretty convinced that local kids are bringing their parents to the site, so it's kind of doing its work there. And I think giving the opportunity for kids in the area to become really excited about this project, and I think that can have a profound impact, knowing that you need that exposure to nature early on in life to make the biggest impact and to be engaged and care about it. It's like that. Protect something, you've got to care about it. And in order to care about it, you've got to know about it.
Tinglings go down my spine there, because I just think it's so great to hear other organisations saying the things. It's like having a game of bingo, and all the things you're saying, Chloe and I have been discussing and saying that this is what we need to be doing. So the fact that you are theoretically discussing it, but actually practically implementing it, and also evidencing the value and the impact from what you just described there, it is really, really heartening to hear.
I love the fact that this conversation around what Citizen Zoo is doing was started off this idea of starting with ecosystems, but actually those ecosystems involve people alongside them. And it was really great to hear about the benefit of the reduction in antisocial behaviour and associated with the introduction of beavers, because that's showing these wider systemic effects of essentially a large rodent being introduced to a field, which is amazing.
Don't go into marketing.
Okay. No, it's not my passion subject, but I guess in terms of the impact on the volunteers and the community, what do you think it means to them to have these beavers essentially as their neighbours in this urban context?
I think it's been a focal point for the community to have this. There's been so much excitement. We've had beaver cakes. We've got a beaver postbox topper just in the shopping centre very nearby. And I'm sure someone in the community was responsible for this act of guerrilla crocheting on top of the postbox, but we don't know who, but that kind of typifies the excitement that's sprung up around it. It's hugely important. With Team Beaver WhatsApp chat, we get updates daily. People are sharing. I saw us on Polish national television. Our beaver release was being, they had Polish family, and it was as far away as that. We've got people sharing beaver memes and beaver facts, and they kind of become their own custodians of the project. We want all hands on deck, but even without inviting people, I think the excitement has been so good in the community that it's sprung up organically. But several elements of it are really exciting. The hands-on engagement is amazing for the volunteers in terms of doing those fence checks, learning how to use cameras. That's real life conservation work that people from all walks of life and ages and backgrounds are doing for us, with us. We were trying to make as few barriers to entries as possible. So there's that skilling up element of it. But I also think it's the social element is hugely important. There's litter picking runs, people doing volunteer sessions. When we do the tours of the sites, it's inevitable that we run into someone else from the volunteer group. And it's such a nice moment. We started to recognize people by name as well. So it's such a nice moment when you can say, oh, this is Jill and she's doing the fence check today. And there's a bit of an organic conversation there with the people that are coming to see the site.
I'm wondering, with all of the projects that you're involved with across Citizen Zoo, how do you go about recruiting volunteers? How do you help people to be aware of the project, and how do you kind of incentivize them to participate?
Interesting point. So one thing to recognise, London, we've got a population here of over 8 million people. So 8.7 million, I think we're now seeing at London. So we have an incredible amount of people that are living here. Well, our aspiration is that as a population there, we want everybody, it's maybe a bit like a panacea, but I would love everybody to have some level of nature engagement, conservation in their lives. So I think we're starting in a good place by working in these urban settings. By definition, there's more people living there, so we have more opportunities to engage people. So actually, many of our projects, especially when we're working with charismatic creatures such as water voles, beavers, maybe white storks in the future, that's something we're looking at.
That's why Elliot should be in marketing.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I think the animals are doing our marketing for us, because we're using these animals as hooks to get people in. And once you talk about water vole or beaver, then you can open up their eyes to amazing other wildlife that is enlaced, entwined in around their lives. But how we do it, I think, a lot of it is organic. People see the projects happening. People talk about it. We're trying to embed it in communities. As Digby's saying, with that beaver project now, we have a whole community there that is self-perpetuating, is self-growing, because there's so much excitement and there is a real core to what they're trying to achieve. But we're always trying to improve. One thing I would say, London is an incredibly diverse community. There's over sort of 200 languages spoken in London. What makes London so special is its multicultural wealth. Unfortunately, a lot of that isn't really represented in the conservation movement. So I think what we really have to try and do is really reflect the communities that we're working in from a sort of, ethnic backgrounds and all the sort of other backgrounds that within the amazing city. So that's something I think we need to work harder on as an organisation, is really transcending community as a whole and really trying to encourage people from all walks of life to participate. Because a lot of the people are sort of white, middle class, retired, and we want to really try and break out of that mould.
I think that's a really interesting question. It's something we've touched on in a previous podcast with Young Wilders. But how do we go about doing that? How do we invite people from all walks of life to get involved when the representation isn't there necessarily for them to feel like this is something I could do?
Question I feel I'm probably underqualified to mention, because I think, one thing to say is London has this incredible diverse community. So if we can't do it in London, I don't know where we can do it, So I think it was a really good test bed to really demonstrate how inclusive and multicultural and brilliant and vibrant conservation can be. But how to do it, I'm probably the wrong person to ask. I think we need to go into the various amazing communities and ask them, what are the barriers that you are facing? Like when you go to a conservation session and you just see lots of white, middle-aged, old people, maybe you can't relate to that community, which is completely understandable. So how can we be more inviting, more open, and really get people relating with these projects? And I think we are starting to see that happen. But I think it's a long road, but we just need to be open. We need to listen. And we just need to try and just be as inclusive as we possibly can be.
With that, like you say, the population is so large that I imagine once you do have a big announcement or you're all over the media, there is an influx of people wanting to support and get involved. So how big is the organisation and how do you manage the level of interest that you generate in a way that people feel like they've all been heard and a way that they feel like they can all engage in the conversation? I speak to a number of charities and not-for-profits, and sometimes they say to me, we don't want to get too successful because we don't know how we're going to manage and service the people that engage with us.
So one thing at Citizen Zoo, we are still quite small, and I think that's almost by design, so we can have that sort of flexibility. One thing that I'm very pleased to say of Digby, Ben, and also we're about to recruit somebody else, we have the world's first urban rewilding officers. You can't work anywhere else than be an urban rewilding officer, something we're very proud of. We have a team of 3 on-the-ground urban rewilding officers, which doesn't sound that many when we're working, in a huge city like London, and we also work outside of London a little bit as well. We have the boring things like our board of trustees, for example. The most incredible thing about our organisation and where we do hit above is our amazing team of volunteers. So, for example, our water bowl project has over 300 volunteers that participated with the water bowl project. We've got 100 people involved in the beaver project. Where we're small in size in terms of our staff, where we really hit hard is our inclusive nature, our volunteering inclusivity, and getting people, those volunteers, as part of those projects. And that's how we think conservation is going to be scalable, really, by making nature open for all, conservation open for all. And that's how we're really going to try and scale it up. So that's sort of how we sort of operate as an organisation.
It's quality, not quantity, as they say. No, and I think that you've got to really prove the model. You're doing something new, something exciting. And I think the fastest way to failure would be to scale too quickly and just not do a good job. I think it makes sense. I think it's sensible. Now, we've talked about all the really positive things and all the successes you've had, but I'd also like to hear the flip side of that coin. What are the challenges you faced along the way? What are the things that give you the sleepless nights that maybe there's, aspiring urban rewilding people, organizations in other cities, other countries around the world that may want to look to do something similar? What kind of thoughts and advice could you give?
The best thing about the urban environment as we see it, the urban environment is an environment that is willed by the people who are living there. We're not talking about like an ancient woodland that is formed and forged by millennia of evolution. Urban environments by their very nature are dynamic. They're based by innovation. They are built settings. So what I would love to see, and we've got so much more work to go, and so many more challenges are going to present themselves. But as humans, we can dictate what our urban environments look like. So, for example, very randomly, a few years ago, we found a pine marten in the middle of London, which is, a lot of people might think that's quite an exceptional thing to think. And indeed, that pine marten, I don't think it's ever been recorded in London. We don't know how it got there. But how incredible would it be if we designed our cities to accommodate things like beavers, or things like pine martens, things like white storks, and having these incredible complex ecosystems that we're physically living in every day. So I think one of our biggest challenges is how we actually define the urban space. because there's so much definition about, we need the concrete, we need the glass, but actually that's not very resilient when it comes to climate change and engaging people with nature and the huge mental health crisis that we have and the lack of activity crisis. I think our biggest challenge is what urban spaces do we want to live in? And then that can be applied to Manchester, that can be applied to Birmingham, that can be applied to urban cities across the world. You look at Milan, for example, with the Bosco Verticale, where they've got these amazing towers that are covered in vegetation and you've got birds nesting amongst the people. That's the sort of city I want to live in. And then that's a city that will be more future-proof to the challenges of climate change and the biodiversity crisis that we're living in. I think what really keeps me up at night is like, how do we really live in urban spaces? Because if this is where we're going to live, most of people are going to live, how can we make this a healthy place, not just for people, but for wildlife too?
An essential challenge we face is that compromise between human needs and nature needs. And I think it's really important that we are confident about aligning those two things and realizing that you can have an outcome which is good for both. But to cover some other challenges for a rewilding organization that are slightly less high concept, but are, operationally very important. We are organizers, right? We have to, a lot of our time is spent helping to link these things up, sending out emails, making sure that the right number of people are coming to the right place to utilize that people power. And it sounds like that might not be important, but I think that's a really important part is access all the time, right? So like we have to link up this opportunities, make it as easy as possible for people to get out there and do urban rewilding themselves. So it's the organization, it's also the funding, as Elliot said as well. It's spinning all these multiple plates to make sure that we work operationally and that we can identify new opportunities as they are coming on the horizon and be ready to apply for various grants or to make that partnership or to even have that idea. Because since I've been here with this organization, conversations have developed into ideas that have developed into projects that can have a real life application, which I think is amazing and exciting. But at the same time, we need to keep proactive about how we're balancing those things. We're maybe limited by our own ambition, which is a really great position to be in.
From both what you just said, Digby, and Elliot's point as well. Our last interview, we had Mary Colwell on, and I mean, if anyone hasn't listened to that episode, I really recommend it. Super inspiring person. But she talks about the importance of nature literacy. And that phrase, since she said it, has just stuck with Chloe and I. And I think it all comes back to, if we want to achieve that vision of, Elliot, you're painting the picture of this urban environment with plants and trees growing up the size of high rises and birds living with, nesting inside those high rises. But you've increased the nature literacy to explain to people why that's important, why there's so much value and why it's really exciting, so they feel part of that journey as well. And so it all comes back to, let's educate people, let's let them understand the beauty, but not just the beauty, because that's fine, but it's the beauty and the science and the importance of nature and what role it's fulfilling around us. And then if you do that right, I think the rest of what we've just been discussing will naturally fall into place, hopefully.
Absolutely, Tom. And I think the first thing to say is how lucky are we on planet Earth to have someone like Mary Colwell who's championing what she's been doing. I've only had the pleasure to meet her a few times and hear her talk a few times, but the work she's been doing to champion the GCSE in natural history is absolutely incredible. Shame on the government for being so slow on really taking her up on the amazing work that she's been doing to really push that forward. Because as you say, we need children to care about nature. And as Digby said earlier, they can't care about things they just don't know and don't engage with. And having that GCSE up and running is going to be so important, not just for the children who are going to be experiencing it, but the society as a whole. Imagine the sort of systemic changes we might see of a whole new generation coming through who have that better baseline understanding, trying to combat that nature illiteracy. So amazing work to Mary, and I really hope she gets the support and traction to get that up and running as soon as possible. But yeah, our urban environments are a big part of that as well, right? So if we have nature ingrained in our curriculum and nature ingrained in our cities, that is going to be a much greater sort of society. That's a better place where I'd want to live. So I really hope we can really see some real changes in how we engage with nature on a daily basis moving forward.
When we run volunteer sessions, sometimes corporate or sometimes members of the community, it's really interesting when you come across someone that says they're not into nature or I don't do nature. I've come across a couple of people, and it's not a situation that we ultimately want, is to have people that feel completely disconnected from that integral part of existing on planet Earth. Everything is nature. Everything that we do is dependent on our ecosystems being healthy. It's our life support system. But I think it's an interesting challenge, and I want to put people off when they say that they're not into nature. But I think what we can offer is experiential learning and being there on the ground. And that, I think, alters people's perception potentially more effectively than being told what they should care about. So those people that turn up to our events say, I don't really like nature. They then build a dead hedge and they feel accomplished because they've built a dead hedge. And then incidentally, you can tell them that that's an excellent habitat for invertebrates or nesting birds. And there is more of a connection there that comes from a slightly different approach from just being told what's important. I mean, that's what's really exciting about the natural history GCSE, as well as it's kind of multidisciplinary from what I understand of it. It's not just looking at the science, it's also looking at art and literature and all these different angles that are important for getting people to care about the planet. And it doesn't have to be, it takes all sorts, right? You don't have to be super knowledgeable ecologist to care about these things. And likewise, you don't have to do the same activity. You can engage in it in a particular way that suits you. So I think that literacy is really important because it's making people more comfortable in the natural space as well, and making them feel like it's something that they could be part of rather than just preserve of the Anunnaki types.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a really enjoyable conversation, and I find it particularly inspirational hearing about some of the projects and kind of trying to picture and trying to reconceptualize my notion of an urban space, and now picturing these havens for wildlife within them, of whether it's the rivers or the voles or paradise fields. And I'm never going to forget that description with the beavers within it. And I guess I'm wondering whether there are any other ecosystems that you're rewilding currently within the urban context that you'd like to celebrate.
I think a really thing to think about, it always brought up in the rewilding narrative is scale. Like, is it too big? Is it too small? But, really thinking about like the size in which you're doing. And then there's a lot of debate around definition, around how we can apply rewilding to scale. But from our perspective, within Citizen Zoo, rewilding can be done in the smallest of places. You can effectively rewild your sort of windowsill if you want to put a few sort of a bird feeder on it and you want to put some plants on it. That is, in my view, you're turning a space that's previously supporting no life, and now that space is now supporting life. So it's trying to get out of the confines of thinking, oh my gosh, this is only going to be achievable if we have these huge areas to be able to work on. And then conversely, looking at places like our roadside verges, we're now entering no mow May. Let's try, just try and embrace nature in our daily lives in terms of as we walk up and down the streets. If we see a bit of longer grass on the side of verge, let's not think that's a mess. Let's actually think that's a more complex ecosystem there that can potentially support more pollinators, more wildflowers, and that is something we should try and embrace and not see as neglect, but actually see as something we should strive towards in endorsing and supporting in daily life. But one thing we are actually really trying to look at in the urban space is actually how we can really try and get those ecological processes unfolding. A really important part of rewilding is having those functional ecosystems. With our beaver site, we've now shown that this 8-hectare site, 8-hectare enclosure, ecological as now a self-willed environment. The beavers are managing that scale, that site. So that, to my mind, that is a rewilding project because the beavers are managing that site for ecological processes. One thing we're looking to work on soon is a site called Tolworth Court Farm in southwest London. And this is about a 43-hectare site. And we're looking to try and turn it effectively and really try and apply sort of grazing, rewilding principles on that site. So one thing we're going to be really intrigued to see in the next few years, how small can we go with like these herbivores moving through a landscape with pigs and cattle and wetland creation. So it'll be really interesting to see in the next few years how we can really try and create a sort of a rewilded landscape on a sort of 42-hectare space, and see if we really can try and turn that into basically like a mini version of the NEP estate.
I wish listeners could see this recording because Elliot looks like he's got an ecosystem in his house, but the size of the house plants that you've got behind you, I can't even keep an orchid alive, and yet you've got like a jungle in your video.
And also, I think, Digby, obviously you've been at the organisation for a little bit, not quite as long, so you've got some modest plants in the background, but I assume when you join, they give you the plants, you have to nurture them, to grow. Okay, good, great.
I'm just slightly further behind in the evolutionary process. One day I will also have a massive green wall behind me like Elliot.
Thank you so much, guys. I guess, is there anywhere that you'd want to signpost listeners to, that they could find out more about your work or get involved in any way?
Definitely. I think our website, citizenzoo.org, we have a Volunteer with Us page. We regularly publicise our London-based volunteer sessions, so you can sign up to join those there. You can also email us at hello@citizenzoo.org if you have any suggestions or questions or queries, and we're very good at getting back to people. We pride ourselves on that. Elliot, anything else?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to come get involved, as Digby says, every other week we're running volunteer sessions on the ground in spaces across London. So come get out, come see the beaver site, come get involved with the Waterfall Project, come see Tolworth Farm, even become a grasshopper keeper if you want. There's lots of things that we have opportunities to get involved in. So yeah, check out the website. And thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to talk about Citizen Zoo and urban rewilding on your fantastic podcast, guys. Really lovely to speak to you.
Thank you. You know what they say, great minds think alike. And I think when you get all those bingo ticks in the boxes when they've talked about or discussed or enacting all the things that we have been discussing, it really is great to see what I quite like to see in the next step, the evolution, some of that was quite anecdotal, some of that feedback from the guys. It was we believe the antisocial activity has reduced, or we believe that kids are bringing their parents down to paradise fields. And I believe that too, but let's quantify it. Let's prove it, because it just builds the argument for doing this more, and crucially builds the argument for funding it if it can be proved to not only be good for mental health, be good for nature, but also maybe have a higher likelihood of reducing crime or whatever that might be. It's just ticking all those boxes in those inner city areas. So that, I'm sure they're thinking of that, but that'd be great to see if I could. Yeah.
Oh, Tom makes a point about the importance of evidence. It's almost like he's married to a psychologist.
Or it's almost like I'm just massively cynical and I need some evidence behind it.
The word that I was left with after the interview was that idea of proactivity. I just think it's so exciting to hear these stories that begin with friends with an idea, these grassroots organisations that want to solve a problem and they want to get there quickly, and they use their energy and their proactivity to drive that forward.
I mean, you might call them grassroots organisations, but they have achieved so much so quickly. The fact they're on the steering committee for urban rewilding, the fact that they've introduced thousands of wild animals back to places where they become extinct or hard to find, I think it's really inspirational stuff.
And my final reflection, you might have to bear with me a little bit because it's coming to a systemic connection, but
oh, great.
There's the obvious benefits, isn't there, of getting people in urban spaces engaged in rewilding projects. I mean, 84.4% of the UK population lives in an urbanised context. So the fact that there is more nature in those spaces is great for people's well-being. It's great for nature. It's the ecological benefits. All that stuff is kind of obvious. But then when Digby and Elliot were talking about the understanding that brings for people, it was making me think about the power of that percentage in terms of how they might be influencing nature outside of that urban space. So once you start to understand, I don't know, the role that beavers play in an ecosystem or how water voles are important, you start to think about nature outside of the urban environment. And then you might start to think about, okay, well, when I'm making a food choice, what do I know about how that food choice is impacting on the natural world? Maybe I need to think about buying organic rather than that which I know is being grown with chemicals, or maybe I need to think about actually how much land is associated with the beef burger that I'm eating versus a more plant-based alternative. And I think it's those ripple effects that go beyond just that localised impact of helping to restore an ecosystem within the urban context.
I mean, do you want to do a study on it?
Sounds quite complicated, but you give it a go.
Well, lots to think about, and thank you very much yet again to those guys for coming on the podcast. Right, that's it for another episode. I just want to probably do a little shout out for our WhatsApp group. It seems to be becoming more and more popular now, and I think I'm really enjoying it as a medium of engaging with people. So if you've got to the end of the podcast, if you've enjoyed it, then do consider joining our WhatsApp group. All you've got to do is go to grangeproject.co.uk/WhatsApp, and it will take you to our group, and then you can join it. You'll instantly be connected to our announcement page. But if you actually want to have a chat with people, there's 2 or 3 more groups you can come and join.
Yeah, it's a great space for support, sharing knowledge and conversing with like-minded people.
All right, well, next episode, we'll have an update on the pigs, and also our tiny homes will be in situ.